Welcome to People Doing Good for Others. Good morning, I'm Gary York, and this is People Doing Good for Others, as we honor and celebrate and hold in the light those who truly make significant differences in our communities. Thank you again for being with us, and again, I am Gary York with WIFM, and I want to thank Wilkes Communications and RiverStreet Productions for this wonderful opportunity. My featured guest today is Mr. Doug Cotton. He's a career law enforcement advocate, a person who's given so much of his life to protecting our society. He grew up here in Wilkes County. He started at Wilkes Community College, then ASU, and then was with Sheriff Maston, and now, or just recently with Sheriff Shue, as we bring great professionalism to our law enforcement. He continues to be a teacher and advocate and one who cares in special ways. So good morning to you, Doug Cotton. And I was honored to have your wife here, Dr. Donna, and your name came up, and I said, well, that'd be a good opportunity for us to bring you aboard. So thank you for being here, and
thank you for having me.
Tell us about your mom and dad coming to Wilkes County and how we got started.
Okay. I was actually born on an Army base in southwest Arizona. It was called Fort Huachuca. My dad was in the Army in 1962. He was in Special Forces, and right before he went to Vietnam, we were out there. So that's where I was born. After he got out of the Army, he went to work for a company in Cary as an accountant, and he was there, and he had a mutual friend that actually introduced him to Mr. Don Culler and Ed Gardner. At that time, they had Gardner Mirror and just started, and they met, and they asked Daddy if he would come and come here and work for them. So we moved up here when I was in the first grade, and we moved to Millers Creek. I went to Millers Creek Elementary School, walked when weather permitted. Our house was, 2/10 of a mile from the school, and we walked every day to and from school as weather permitted. Went to West Wilkes after leaving Millers Creek Elementary School, went to West Wilkes after that. Really didn't know what I was going to do, and so some friends of mine were going to the community college, and my parents were both college educated, so my mom was a nurse. She worked in the operating room for years, and they both said, you're going to college. That's not a choice. So I started at the community college, and my friends were taking some criminal justice classes, so I took them. I started with just college transfer courses, and I took some of the criminal justice classes where I met Tony Randall. He was the lead instructor at that time, and instead of finishing with an associate's degree, one day he came in and said, I think you need to go on and get a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And we talked about it, and he said it opens a lot more doors and opportunities. And we talked a lot about it, and so I applied to ASU, and once I finished at the community college, I went to ASU and got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice. And
Tony Randall was a vital point in your life.
He was, if there's ever been a mentor, Dr. Randall was. He was a special man. He made me love this job the way I am. I doubt I would have done and stayed in it the way that I did without him. He was just a guiding force. He had a private security company. I worked for him there. We did security work over at the community college. We'd just ride around from 10 o'clock at night till 3 or 4 in the morning in a little Jeep, and he headed all that up. So he really piqued my interest in criminal justice.
So let's just quickly transition from ASU to the Sheriff's Department. Is that the way it happened?
Yes, sir. When I was graduating, I was graduating in December, and I came down visiting home, and I was thinking about state or federal jobs, and was thinking about where I wanted to work and what I wanted to do. And my mom said, well, they've just had a sheriff's election down there. Why don't you go and apply at the sheriff's office? And I said, okay, any job's better than no job. And so I went down there and I didn't know who to speak to. So I knew Bill Anderson, who was a former sheriff in the county. And so I contacted Bill and said, what do I need to do to get an application? He told me where to go, and I got an application and put it in. And probably about 2 weeks later, I got a call that Sheriff Fred Myers was the incoming sheriff. He wanted to speak with me. And so I came down to the sheriff's office. I met him. We talked a little bit, and he said, well, I think you'll make a pretty good deputy if you want a job. And I said, yes, sir. I would love it. So I went to work there for him.
Yeah. And then, do you remember the first day?
First day was amazing. I went in and that's when I met Dane Maston, and he was a lieutenant on the shift, and he said, he went along with another guy, said, let's get you a uniform, let's get everything. And it was so different than it is now. We went to our arms room where they went through 3 or 4 different revolvers, handguns, to find one that functioned. And we found one that functioned, and he said, I think that one will work because you have to qualify with your weapons. There were no such things as bulletproof vests. We didn't have any of those. I bought my first flashlight. I bought my first set of handcuffs. So it was really, it was an eye-opener for me, not realizing, golly, this is amazing. But they put me in cars and started the training with other officers, and that's how I started. Just on patrol like everyone else.
Doug Cotton, tell me, what is in the heart of a professional law enforcement person? What is it about this makeup, the value systems of a professional law enforcement officer?
It's certainly not money. It's not public gratitude. In each officer, there is an inherent need, a need to serve people, a need to help people. They all, throughout my career, I've seen that common factor is they want to make a difference, they want to help. And they get that satisfaction in law enforcement because it's hard to explain, why would you do this job? It's not for the money, it's not for public prestige, you're not going to be, so why do you do it? And that's the common factor. All officers just want to help people in any way they can, just to serve and help their communities.
Wow. Okay, and then this relationship with Dane Maston, and then Chris Shue was there also at the same time?
Yes, sir. About a month into working for Sheriff Myers, Dane called me and said, Sheriff wants to see you in his office. And I thought, good gracious, I'm already getting fired. What have I done? So I went there and I walked into his office. He said, come in, sit down. And I sat down, and there was another guy sitting there I'd never seen before in my life. And he said, this is Chris Shue. I'm going to make him my chief detective. And at that time, I was the only officer with a bachelor's degree. And he said, since you've got a college education, I think you can do good in investigations. Would you like to learn from him? And I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, you start Monday, and you're going to be in investigations. And that's how I met Chris. And
okay.
Dane was, like I said, he was on the shift at that time. And Dane and Chris were really good friends. And so I was just kind of, because I was
What year was that?
1987,
okay.
Yes, sir. So because they were good friends, I just kind of fell in with them just by happenstance of the sheriff saying, this is, Chris Shue, and you're going to work with him. At the time, we had 4 investigators for criminal investigations and 2 narcotics officers. That's all that we had. So Chris and I worked the 4 p.m. to midnight shift, and we had 2 daytime detectives. They worked from 8 to 4. So we were together all the time. And Dane being on the shift, he worked the 4 to 8 shift as well. So all 3 of us just got really close from working together, every day.
Yeah. Chief deputy for these countless years. Tell us about when was Dane elected and how that transpired. Just go from there, if you will, Doug Cotton.
As we were going through, and Sheriff Myers has already said, I'm not running for re-election. He was mid-70s at that point. He'd been elected sheriff twice before in the 60s. And Dane said, I think I'd like to run for sheriff. And so the three of us, Chris and Dane and I, would sit and talk about that. And at the time, we were all late 20s. And that had never been thought of before. It was a very political job, and Dane was not political, as Chris and I weren't either. We just were law enforcement officers. And Dane said, I would like to take this and move forward and actually make it to where it's a professional organization, instead of just politicians coming in and hiring and firing and moving around. And he said, I'd like to be able to make it a career. And at that time, you didn't stay at the sheriff's office for a career. It didn't happen because it was such a political office. And he said, I'd like for you two to help me. And I said, okay. And Dane, I'll never forget Dane saying, look, I only may be sheriff for one term, but they're going to know they had a new sheriff for one term. And I said, okay. And Chris said, okay. So there we were again. And Dane ran for sheriff, and he had, I think, 5 other candidates, and he beat them all. And from that point on, he was sheriff for 20 years. So he's a great sheriff.
Go back to the professionalism and the training and the things that Dane Maston brought to the front of what this is. We're going to be a great team. Talk about that.
Dane believed in putting professionalism first, and in sheriff's offices at that time, it wasn't that common. He said, I want to change this. And he said, we're going to bring up training. I want my officers trained. I want better equipment. I want to improve the life and the safety of my officers by giving them better equipment and giving them more training. The Justice Academy does training throughout the years and have. You can go down to Salemburg near Raleigh and take courses. And we just were never able to, because we didn't have the manpower to cover officers as they were in school to do training. So he said, we're going to fix that. We're going to do that. That was critical for him. He said, I want to be known as a professional officer. He said, I don't want people to say, oh, they're just sorry. And he said, that really offends me. And Dane was one of those leaders that he wouldn't ask you to do something that he wasn't right there next to you. He believed in seeing and knowing and talking to the community. He said, I don't believe in the politics getting reelected. He said, I believe in my heart, if I do the job correctly, that will be my political statement and we will get reelected. Dane never spoke of himself. It was always, I have a team, and this team is what I'm putting together to do this. And it appears to have worked.
Oh, yeah. As a chief deputy, you talked about being a subordinate and being a team player and taking part of that command and helping the chief. Go to there for just a minute, if you will.
When you, as we came up, and I was fortunate when Sheriff Shue promoted me to chief deputy, I'd had 30 years of seeing sheriffs and the command staff, and we all, the three of us really, Chris and Dane and I, all had the same mindset, which is servant leadership. You don't order, you don't sit, in the rear and send your people out to do things. You do it with them, or you go and ask them to come with you and show them how to do things, to teach them, because a lot of officers, they've never encountered things. And so it was very hands-on, and that's one of the things that Dane said originally, that when Chris and I were still out working, he said, I hate sitting in this office all the time. Y'all are out doing the job. And we said, yeah. And then years later, Chris said the same thing. I hate sitting in the office. And I laughed and said, well, I don't have to. But as I was getting near the end of my career, I ended up spending more time in the office. And I finally understood I hate sitting in the office all the time. I want to be out, involved in things. And that's just part of that servant leadership mindset. You don't want to sit in the office all day. You want to be part of the community.
Yeah. So let's go to the bomb squad. I mean, how did such a critical part of your career, how did that happen?
It was, again, by circumstance. When Sheriff Myers moved me into investigations, one of the things that we did at that time was we worked arson investigations. Well, no deputy had fire training unless they were a volunteer firefighter, but we had a fire marshal. Every county in the state has a fire marshal, and that fire marshal was responsible for fire investigations, cause and origin, why did this fire start? And if it was an arson or a criminal side, we had to do the investigation because the fire marshal did not have the power of arrest. And so Sheriff Myers would say, fire marshal needs a detective to go out there, run on out there and help him. And at that time it was Kim Walters. We affectionately called him Scrap. But Kim was the fire marshal, and I started helping him with, and I say helping him, I carried his tools and would get things for him just because I had no idea of what he was doing. And over the years he taught me about that. And one of the things that we did was we would pick up old dynamite. People would call and they'd say, my granddaddy passed away and we found a whole bunch of dynamite, would y'all come and get it? And the fire marshal's office was responsible for explosives and fire because it's all kind of the same area. And he called me and said, you want to go with me to get it? And so we said, sure. Well, I would do this a long time, and I started teaching with him and really started enjoying that world. And he said, well, that's one of the things we do. And he had had several classes in dealing with explosives and things like that. And I said, what kind of protective gear do you have? And he said, we don't have any. And I said, why not? He said, I don't know. And I said, we get these things all the time. There's got to be something. And he said, I don't know. So I came back and started doing research on protective gear and bomb squads and things like that. And I found out that the FBI controls all the bomb squads, their training, their accreditations, their certifications. And so I contacted some of the agents I knew, and they said, a bomb squad's something not everybody can have. You don't understand. We don't just, there's 100 counties in North Carolina. We can't give you all these bomb techs. And we said, well, okay, what do we need? And they gave me a whole list of things that we had to accomplish. And one of them was a needs assessment. Do you really need a bomb squad in your area? And so they came up and we're doing all those kind of things. And he said, well, do you have any type of calls where you actually have dealt with live explosives? I don't mean bomb threat calls. I mean, and I started just laying them out. And he said, oh my goodness. And he said, I was hoping 1 or 2. I said, there's 10 right there. And he went, I think we've passed the needs assessment. And so it went from there. And as we were going through that process, September 11th happened. So everything stopped. And you can imagine every agency in the country suddenly said, we want a bomb squad here. And so it really overwhelmed the Bureau, and they were saying, we can't keep up. So it slowed us down as far as getting our certifications and the squad. But after time, they came up and they said, you guys need a squad. We'll support it. We'll have it. And
so that means 8 counties, right? Is that?
There are 100 counties in the state, and each squad is regional. There are 12 bomb squads.
You want a 12.
One of 12 bomb squads, excluding the military. The military have their own, and it's separate. Their training and everything's totally separate. But civilian bomb squads, and every one of them is regional. And what I mean is, if you look at ours, when they said at the time, Wilkes County needs a squad because the whole northwest corner of the state has no coverage. And Wilkes is like the hub of a wheel. And you look, and there are 8 counties that touch Wilkes County, and they said, it's a perfect place. Y'all can go out and cover these counties that don't have any coverage right now. And so that's why we were selected, is to cover the northwest region of the state.
But then the real, action starts when we start funding and trying to come up with, just go there right.
One of the
right
things
now.
that we, that kind of caught me by surprise was they said, you have to show support from your community and your funding agencies because having a bomb squad is not cheap. And you need to show us that you have that funding. And I said, well, how do we do that? And he said, well, we need you to buy a couple of pieces of gear just to show us. And one was an X-ray, portable X-ray unit, and the other was a bomb suit. They said, if you can show those 2 things, that's a good way to get started. And so I went to the Sheriff Maston and told him that, and Dane said, I don't think we can afford that, and I don't think the commissioners are going to approve that, because we were very tight with funding, as we always are. And so we started talking about it, and he knew a gentleman that was very law enforcement proactive, and he said, I think you know this man too. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, why don't you go see him? And he was talking about the late Pete Kolnick. And Mr. Kolnick, and I had known him since I was a child, him being at Lowe's and my dad working at Gardner, there was that mutual business connection, and I knew him, and went to see him, talked to him about it, and he said, well, what's the problem? I said, well, we don't have funding, and we have to show some type of community support. And he said, well, what do you need? And I said, well, they want this, but if we could just get partial. And he said, there's no partial. Tell me what you want. And I said, I don't know what to say. You know, you don't need to buy all this. And he said, that's not a question. What do you want? And so I told him, and it was, I said, well, I'll be glad to mention your, he said, don't you tell a soul. This is not about me. This is about serving my community. And he said, I love this county. And he said, and I love law enforcement. Dane is a great sheriff. And if it's something you need, you'll have it. And he actually supported and funded most of our equipment in those early days. He gave us money every year, to the point where I said, Mr. Kolnick, we're good. We don't need any other funding. And to the day he died, he gave us funding regardless.
So that servant's heart with Dane, relationship with him to start, and you're knowing him, and then all that came together, and what a blessing. What a blessing.
We were blessed to have Mr. Kolnick.
So we're a bomb squad now, and President Obama is going to come from Asheville, I understand, from Asheville Airport to Greensboro, and there's a great opportunity for the Wilkes County Sheriff's Department, this bomb squad.
Because I had done some counterterrorism work and been on some task forces after September 11th, in 2011 I had made contacts with the federal agencies, and they had said President Obama was thinking about doing a North Carolina, Virginia sweep, and they wanted to try these new motor coaches that they had. They look like Greyhound buses, but they're far from Greyhound buses. They're armored and they're super heavy, and I mean, you know, there's just, they call them, they're just huge. And they wanted to try them, and they said, you know, we want to make a stop, and we were thinking about Wilkes County, and I said, okay, let me know. And then the next thing I knew, Sheriff Shue called me in, and he said, you need to call this guy. And I said, okay. And he said, looks like the president wants to come here. And I said, I'd heard that. And so I called, and it was the Secret Service agent that was head of their detail, security detail, and he said, let's meet. And they were over, they set up in Hickory at a hotel over there. They'd set up their headquarters about, I don't know, a month or so before. And I would go over there 2 or 3 times a week, and we talked about security and where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. And we would come over here, they would go to different schools. And
Only because we have a bomb squad.
All because they knew. That's one of the things that, since we've been a bomb squad, we have been involved with 3 presidents. President Bush, President Clinton when he visits in the area, and then President Obama. That's one of the things they require. Is there a bomb squad there?
Wow.
And so that allowed him to come here, because they said, you've got some of the requirements that we need. And they chose this place because of that. Well, it was one of the reasons.
Tell us about West High, why it was chosen as the stop.
As I said, we'd go to middle schools, high schools, look at different venues.
Yeah, the guy came and you went to every opportunity in the county.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
The Secret Service, their advanced details do that. They start looking at everything. And so one of the things they said, we had 2 issues. Where can we get these huge buses in and out? Are there little 2-lane roads going to and from the venues? Can they support the buses? You know, where can we do? And then, unlike when you arrive in their motorcade, when he has the Suburbans or whatever, with a bus, how much time is it he's going to be exposed to the public? So can we get a bus to a door and get him right inside where it's protected? So we looked around, and the location of West High was right on the way. They'd come down from Boone on 421, so it was right on the way. They just went up 16, two good roads, turned onto Boone Trail, and when they looked at West High and we talked about it, they said this is a good venue. They could go straight up the hill or go around the back of the school, and he was not exposed for more than 2 seconds out in the open.
Wow.
So we went to the back of the school. They had plenty of area back there to secure. It was a good venue to bring people in. There was a lot of time and there was a lot of space. So they picked that to get in and out, and the security location, that was just a good place right on his way to
So Chief
Greensboro.
Deputy Cotton, you're working round the clock for a month on this project.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
And so then it happens. And even, I'll never will forget you telling me that manhole covers, if they're going to drive over them, have to be welded tight.
You don't realize the amount of security that the Secret Service has to do. The presidential detail guys, the protective detail squads, regardless of who the protectee is, they are unbelievable in their dedication. They leave nothing to chance.
And you had snipers up in the
We had
woods.
our snipers, one of our SWAT snipers with their counter sniper. They have a counter assault team that drives with the motorcade. So we had people embedded with them.
What are you doing today? You retired after 31 years?
After 30 years,
And
yes, sir.
haven't slowed down at all. You're doing a lot of training and teaching. So share with us what a professional person of the greatest sheriff's department in the country, I believe that now. So tell us about what you're doing with your life today in that arena.
When I retired from the sheriff's office, Chris wanted me to stay active. So I've kept my law enforcement certification active. And one of the things I've done through my career is I teach in the basic law enforcement training courses. And I teach as well as fire colleges because of Ken Walters starting to go with him. They first wanted classes in methamphetamine, clandestine drug labs, and I was certified at the time to be a clandestine drug lab investigator because it's all hazardous materials, so you had to go to specialized training. And so I had done that, so I started going with him to, they call them fire colleges, they're weekend colleges, and generally they're held around the state at different community colleges for the volunteer firefighters and paid firefighters and rescue, EMS, any emergency services person wants to come. So I've done that for 20 years and gone all across the state on weekends and teach and explain. I teach terrorism, I teach bombs, explosives, how to make their jobs safer, what they can do, what do they expect if they find something, what bomb squads do, because most people don't have any idea what bomb squads do. And so I've tried to teach them these are things to help you be safer and explain to them that it doesn't have to be a huge package to injure and kill a lot of people. And I think that's one of the things that has kept me really active and involved is the amount of interaction with especially the younger emergency services people coming in, wanting to learn and wanting to know, and that's kept me really busy, as well as doing in-service for our sheriff's office. I teach for our guys as well, and I teach over at the community college still in the basic law enforcement program. So teaching has kept me really active and engaged. Obviously, I still am in close contact with the sheriff, and sometimes I'll go with him different places, and we'll do speaking events and things like that. So it's enough to keep me busy.
Well, that's great. Well, you've honored us in a very special way today, and I'm just so grateful to have connected with you. And I want to thank Wilkes Communications, RiverStreet, and Productions, and WIFM. Certainly, you are a devoted servant. You are a person whose heart is about mattering in the lives and the safety of others. So in our last minute, if you will, just Doug Cotton, tell us about how your life has been enriched by this opportunity, and maybe that moment with Dr. Randall and to today.
From those early days, meeting him, I never had any intention of, like I said, being local law enforcement. I thought state or federal, and then being at the right place at the right time and meeting Sheriff Myers and then meeting Sheriff Maston and Sheriff Shue turned my whole philosophy into, I want to do what they do. And Dane said, you know, if you have the opportunity to go anywhere in the country to be a federal or state law enforcement officer, if you're going to serve people and want to be those, why don't you stay here and protect the people that you know, your home folks, so to speak. And that changed my whole attitude where I said, you're right. That makes a difference to me. And so I've done that, and I've been enriched so much by it, because when you help people that you don't know, you're helping people. But to see people that you know, that you've grown up with, that know you personally.
There's a lot of support at home. You want to mention that?
My wife I'm blessed. As President Reagan said one time about his wife, I married up. She was special and is special because she always said, do what you do. You know, don't worry about being at home. And my gosh, most years I missed holidays or family events, or because we were gone all the time. You were either on call or working, and she put up with that. And that's a very hard thing for a spouse to do. But again, I've been blessed. Everything fell into place.
Chief Deputy Doug Cotton has been sharing with us today, and now we know about the heart and the soul of a law enforcement person as he's given his life to Wilkes County and across the state. And we want to thank again you for being with us today. Chief Deputy serving behind the scenes, one that's with a servant's heart, who gives and shares and cares and does it with anonymity, with great honor, and blessing this community in a special way. And I hope you'll come back. What a blessing to have you here.
Thank you for having me.